Effectively, they're like the intermediary between the government and the people. And only you need that in a democracy, right? So it's a really important role. And like, are they doing it?
The Herald started recycling a huge amount of its content from the Daily Mail. So recently they published like 14 signs he's going to leave you and stuff like that. And it's just like, wow, is this really what we expect from our national newspaper?
Yeah, that's bad quality journalism, absolutely. But I mean, are they doing that job of telling us what the government's up to? Because that's kind of the main job, right? So they can get clicks in between with 14 signs he's going to leave you. But maybe it's like, are they actually doing their job, which is telling us what our political parties and stuff are up to, so that we can then vote accordingly?
But
right?
is that? I mean, who says that that's their job?
Well, if you take away the media, right? What else? How else do we know what's going on in the government and in the world and all that stuff, right? So there's such
the
an
media
important
tells you about what's going on in the world.
I think they're an integral part of the democratic process. Like you can't have a democracy without dispersing the information amongst the people.
And the media does that.
And the media is meant to do it, but nowadays social media does it. Yeah. I get most of my news from my news feed.
I think there's a false dichotomy between tabloid media and quality media. I think almost all of the Western news media has a very limited view of the world. And to answer your question, or to misquote a slurring Eastern European philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, he said the difference between living under a communist society with a completely controlled media and our society is that at least in the communist society they understood that their media was very limited and controlled. And my feeling genuinely is that the media's job is probably to support the dominant ideologies that exist, and it probably does that job really well. And its job is also to pretend that there is a choice in the matter. But in reality, the political parties in Western democracies basically offer exactly the same thing in a slightly different flavour. The media makes that look like there's a real choice happening. There was a Harvard study about 10 years ago where they tested the policies that are discussed in the media, and then they saw which way they actually went, and in 100% of cases they went in the interests of the people who own the newspaper. For me, and I'm just putting a counter to you, I think it's problematic to say that the media exists to serve this purpose of the fourth estate. I don't know when that was invented, but I think the media serves the purpose of the people who own the newspapers. Fundamentally, a journalist might believe that they're doing something useful, and some of them do, but it's a tiny minority. And those ones that do something useful are sort of there as window dressing for the large amount of the media, which exists to make you think that.
Yeah,
I didn't define my term. I meant news media.
Yeah.
I meant specifically kind of the Herald and those news programs. I'm not talking generally about, say, people who write online for the spin-off or those worthy journalists.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about this driving the car around. So that's my diatribe. Thank you for listening, guys.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that to a certain point. You're basically saying it's what's hot topic and what's not hot topic is what the media basically gives to people.
The news media presents a very tiny and limited picture on the world based on whether people are white, wealthy, from Western countries, whether it's extremely negative, whether it's a story they can tell, and they're very repetitive in their stories, so it has to be a story they've told before. For example, 15 people just drowned in Texas, 1,500 people just drowned in Nepal from flooding, and I've struggled to find the Nepal story. So if there was a balance, then there should be an equal balance to there should be 100 times more Nepal story. So especially in terms of who we cover, it's extremely limited. And I think it's dangerous when people think that because you read the newspaper, you know about the world. You read the newspaper, you know about what they tell you. What the dominant sort of people... No, it's not they. I mean, it's everyone together. We're all in it. It's not like there's an evil group of people going, I'm a lizard person. But we live in a society where money is key. So the people with money, their voice... subtly filters through the system, and maybe my problem with it is that I think the people who write it don't realise, and I think as consumers of it, it's very hard to remember that this stuff that's presented to us is a very limited selection of stories.
To make us feel like we're actually involved in what's going on, as opposed to like communist states.
I think overall, my opinion of New Zealand media is that they are actually doing a pretty good job, and I've this is like first-hand accounts, so it doesn't really count. But I've spoken to, I work with reporters sometimes, and I've asked them if they ever feel like they've been censored by their superiors. You know, like maybe the story they're doing is just a little bit too juicy or something like that. And like sometimes they get their stories rejected from the editor, but they've never. None of them said to me like, yeah, I really feel like there's a conspiracy from on top, or you know, these people won't push a certain angle and stuff. And I reckon it's because nowadays with social media, they kind of can't, you know, like there's no such thing, like you can downplay a story in your social media influence if you're the Herald or whatever and you don't want to concentrate on something, but it still comes up through some other source, you know.
And
so
then you have to address it anyway.
Yeah, and you have to address it anyway, but you look like you're doing it second, you know, so it's not as good for the Herald.
So it's almost like an interesting competition going on to see who can keep their fingers on the pulse and be like most involved, because like you said, the minute it comes up
and you didn't have it, it's bad, looks bad. Yeah. So overall, I kind of feel like they are actually doing a pretty good job because they have to. I think the real issue comes from, like, there's all these interesting things like the Nepal drownings, for example, right? And nobody gives a shit. Nobody's clicking on it. Who cares, right? But the problem's not that the media didn't do a story about it. There probably is a story out there. The issue is that the pea-brained imbeciles that we are, the public, you know, didn't click on it. You know, we clicked on a story about scribe smoking pea, you know, because that was more interesting to us than 15 people dying in Texas or in Nepal or wherever you said it was.
Well, this process has predated the internet.
Yeah.
The Western media having a very, very narrow focus on rich people
but isn't that the point? Now they have to be broader because we can just get it from somewhere else.
Well, no, the same process exists. I mean, Noam Chomsky, famous boring theory person, wrote a book about this 25 years ago, which I still think is relevant, and he talked about a thing called manufacturing consent. His basic idea was to work within the media, to work within any organisation, you have to adopt its ideology. So you might be a journalist who thinks, yeah, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to write about Nepal, I hate the way that all the stories are just sensational bullshit, but when you want to get a job, when you want to get promoted, you get the idea of how it's swinging. Yeah. So you have to pretend to hold the values, the toxic values of the news media. And after a few years, this consent has been manufactured, and you've kind of forgotten your values. And so the reason that your friend doesn't get challenged is because without knowing it, he has consented to a status quo which is I think very limiting and quite toxic for our society. You know, like reporting all these juicy crime stories stops us from having a genuine discussion about how to deal with crime, which is invest in young people before they become criminals.
Yeah. But you can send them to boot camp instead.
Because that's a story.
That's a story.
How about this? Hey, I want to spend lots of money on getting kids before they start costing millions of dollars, sending them to jail by throwing some money at social services. That could work in an environment where the media didn't constantly report on crime stories and create this drumbeat of hatred towards young brown people. There is a social cost, an extreme social cost that we all suffer from the very limited and story-based and sensational media. And I guess I just find myself getting angry with it every day whenever I read the newspaper. Yeah. And I never get to talk about it. I never get to just share with people. Share my... But I think it's great that you have a much more positive view. Because
I'm good. Well, then we won't fight about it.
My first perception of the media was 9/11, and
wow.
That was the first thing I remember. I mean, we lived in the arse end of nowhere in South Africa. My parents didn't even have a satellite TV. Like everything came in newspaper form, and that was my first moment when I realised something like the media existed. So, and that was in South Africa, obviously. So, what would you say your first acknowledgement of the media was?
We always watched the news growing up, and even more when I would be visiting with my grandparents and stuff. And this is back in the glory days of the New Zealand news media with Judy Bailey, and she was fantastic. She just had such a manner about her and seemed to take it all so seriously, and was very compassionate and very good at communicating, which doesn't seem to be a key part of the job anymore. I worry about it. It's like there's a lot of focus on building a story and creating a narrative without necessarily having as much integrity as somebody might do.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to believe everything on the news like it was like gospel, you know, like so just if it comes on it's from the news, right? It must be official. It must be true. It must be real. You know, it's got to be. But it's probably more a change in me than the media. The media is probably equally as dishonest as it's ever been, maybe. But I've just kind of grown up a little bit more and I'm a little more critical of it. And don't believe it all as much.
It mostly has to be factual because they can get sued.
Worse.
But it's just what they choose to report on and what they choose to leave out.
But what if they?
You know, they can like Judy Bailey maybe have more facts than whoever Paul Henry. I mean, he probably has less facts.
What about that idea though that if they choose not to report on, they choose not to push an angle, but that angle comes up somewhere up through the spin-off or through something else anyway, you know, and so it just kind of makes it becomes that they have to ride with it and roll with it, and they have to report on whatever's current because we will find it in our news feeds anyway.
See, I understand the merit of both of your arguments, but I feel like particularly now, like you were saying, on Facebook, I don't get my news from one source.
Yeah.
I follow everything from the Onion to the New Zealand Herald to, all the trashy Daily Mail and stuff in the UK as well, and Fox News and CNN, and especially during the Trump election campaign, which I don't think we have enough hours to talk about. I found it really interesting to follow both CNN and Fox to see how they both presented stories. So I feel like the minute one party got like a scoop story on something the other party hadn't reported, they could be like, oh, look at these 15,000 dead in Nepal. Oh wait, why did CNN not report it?
Yeah.
So I feel like there are a lot more interesting angles coming out, and a lot of that has to do with
that diversity.
Facebook.
Yeah, I think the internet is hopefully the future.
But isn't there also that problem that it's trying to generate things like as they happen? You've got to be in first, regardless whether or not you're getting all the facts or similar.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a long-standing gripe with the Herald, especially their online edition.
You have a negative thing to say about the Herald?
I've got some problems with the Herald. It's recently, within the past few months, they had a story about, some woman who got a visa declined, and then she was going to have to leave New Zealand, and she was going to apply for citizenship next year. I'm like, cool, well, she definitely wasn't going to get it because the prerequisite for citizenship, unless you can claim it through descent or birth, is that you've held a resident visa for at least 5 years.
So you're saying the
These are
media
basic facts.
prompted
Well,
her...
they're putting in her side of her story, her account of what her future was in New Zealand. I was going to do this, and it's like a basic thing to just check and say, well, it wasn't going to work.
Well, do we say the most recent example of that would be the guy with the Nick tattoo? Do you guys know him?
Face tattoo.
Face tattoo.
Devastate.
Who was complaining of not getting job offers.
Yeah.
And then, because I think New Zealand Herald ran with it, and then I saw it on a different media platform where it was like, he's actually been offered 150 jobs, and New Zealand Herald hasn't reported, but he's actually turned them all down.
Yeah.
So it just wiped the entire premise of their entire argument. So I really enjoyed the battle between the competing.
Yeah.
I'm more just watching.
Which
for
is
the
why it's
drama.
really important that we have competing platforms
Yeah.
in New Zealand, and there's the NZME and Fairfax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're both just terrible.